Imagine that you are in the 1920s, almost 100 years after the Industrial Revolution, so you're able to see the long-term effects that this event had in history. People are now able to travel from one place to another in just hours thanks to railroads. Clothing in general, food, cars, many things are mass-produced, so their prices are lowered. Many breakthroughs in genetics have been made, so we are now able to understand how the human is made, and we understand more about how our ancestors were and how our children will be. So you're in the 1920s, and many people are excited about all of these breakthroughs in science. Of course, you also have the other side of the coin. You also have the people that think that science is responsible for things like World War I. And in this group of people, we have a particular person of interest, Bertrand Russell. Now, Bertrand Russell was an English philosopher that lived almost 100 years. He was also a great mathematician, and he spoke about many things, among them logic, ethics, and nationalism, and many other important topics in philosophy. But what we are going to talk about today in specific is one of his greatest essays, which is called Icarus, or the Future of Science. So welcome to Classius Beard, and today we will be analyzing how Bertrand Russell said that science could ultimately be the end of mankind. The first great threat that Russell saw was that technology was centralizing power. Picture the medieval age. If a king wanted to talk to a duke of one of his regions, he had to send a letter which would take days on horseback to reach that duke. So kings tended to trust their dukes a lot to choose their own things because they only were able to communicate with them for the very important matters. In that sense, regional governments had more power since they didn't rely so much on the centralized government. But look nowadays with technology. If a president wants to talk to a governor, he can simply video call them. He can email them. He can even fly to the region, to the state he wants to go to in just a matter of hours. What does this mean? That the central government has more influence over regional governments. Or more specifically, the central government's power was increased. Threat number 2 that Russell saw was that we are getting used to living in excess. Now, industrialism has brought many great things. We are now able to mass produce medicine, food, many things that we had to take a long time to produce before, and we certainly had to put much more work to produce them before. But now factories are making everything mass produced. They are making, if you want a shirt, you can have 100 shirts in just an hour. And that in itself isn't a bad thing. If you want to have many shirts, you can have many shirts. You're free to do whatever you want. But the problem that Russell saw was that this amount of demand was making factories and industries compete for more raw material. And this competition was growing to be rather unhealthy. Nations were fighting over which had more land, which had more oil to produce more things, and overall this meant more wars, which deeply preoccupied Russell. According to the philosopher, this was where liberalism had failed, and to solve this problem we had to establish a huge government that would rule the whole world, making every region have their fair share. Now, I personally disagree with Russell in this point. I don't think that liberalism has failed and that one great huge power is what we need to solve. Maybe the problem was that Russell wasn't very familiar with anti-monopoly policies that, well, didn't exist back then, and he thought that just one power was the only thing that could solve this problem. But currently, almost all countries in the world have free markets, and they fight for raw materials, and they do so fairly. They do so with a good and healthy competition, which means that not all industrial growth is unhealthy competition growth. The third threat that Russell saw was that science is being used to promote the power of dominant groups. But how is science precisely helping dominant groups? Mostly through publicity. Think about it. In the medieval ages, the only way to find out about news was to go to the plaza and hear just one man that had been recently traveling shout the news out. People would sit around this man and just hear what he had to say without knowing if that news was really true or if he had invented it all up. The king had royal people in charge that went to the big cities and were the designated ones to shout out the news, and that was taken to be the best source of news. But really anybody could have shouted in a plaza, and you wouldn't have had any other choice but to listen to that person, since it's the only source. But nowadays we have radios, we have TV, we have the internet, we have newspapers. Even just printing a huge poster and putting it on the street, that was something that you were not able to do before. To put a drawing on a wall, somebody would have had to sit there and draw for hours. But now you can print almost thousands of posters and put them anywhere in a city, which means that if you had enough resources, if you had enough money to do all of these things, you were increasing your influence over the population, which in turn meant that you were increasing your power. You were being more dominant. Now, having influence is not a good or a bad thing. It depends on what the influencer is saying, how he is using your influence. You can have a very good influencer who wants to spread peace and he uses all of his influence to do so. That is a great thing. But then you can have a person with a really bad message influencing everybody and using the whole media to just put bad ideas in people's mind. Like, for example, 20 years later, or well, 15 years later, came Adolf Hitler, which was precisely what Russell feared. People like Hitler would not have been able to share their ideas as effectively if they did not have all of these resources. Maybe Hitler's ideas would just have spread through a couple of cities and not reached all of Germany. The fourth point that Russell wants to make is science is not the problem. It is what you do with science. Again, like the influence scenario, it depends on how you use it. If you want to use science for medical research, for that type of development, it's okay. But if you want to use science to make huge bombs and spy on people, well, that isn't good. So it all comes down to your intentions when using science. And the fifth and last thing that I want to point out about Russell's essay is that science brings more organization, which in turn brings less liberty. To explain this point, he used the example of a miner. Now, the miner doesn't decide how he does his job, when he does his job, and the benefits he gets from his job. That is decided by the company. If the miner wants to go on a strike, that is decided by the union he is part of. If the miner wants to vote for a prime minister, he technically can decide, but he has only 3 choices. When the miner takes his child to school, he is not deciding what the child is going to be taught. Probably a Ministry of Education already decided what was pertinent for a child to know. Now compare the life of that miner with the life of a 14th century shoemaker. Big companies did not exist in the 14th century. And probably the child of that shoemaker is not going to receive any other education than the one that his parents provide for him or her. Personally, I disagree again with Russell in this point because I think he's being a little bit too anarchist. Science is the whole reason why I'm able to tell you what I think about this essay right now. Because if nobody had invented the camera, the computer which I'm going to edit this video with, the website I'm going to post this video on, I would have never been able to transmit this message. So yes, science does bring more organization, but that organization does not always mean less liberty. But again, that's just my opinion. Now, if you like this video, please share it with everybody. Again, your neighbors, your dogs, your cat, anybody or anything that could like this video. I'm leaving the link for last week's video over here. And please subscribe for more weekly content. I'm also leaving that link here. And if you happen to think anything different about this essay or about anything I've said, please leave a comment down below. I'd be really happy to debate with you. And that's all. See you next week for more debate.